Well, hello DP1. So today what we're going to chat about is how to go about adding layers and texture to your pastel drawings. And so kind of where you guys are, hopefully at this point from our instruction, you have started out doing your lightest colors, which is what I asked you to do in preparation for today's demo, which is going to be how do you add texture, how do you add detail, how do you make things look like fur or feathers or even scales, Miss T? Well, the first thing that I'm going to start out with is telling you that it takes layers and it takes patience and that it takes a little bit of working the surface. And we're going to be going over how to do all of that kind of stuff today. I'm going to start at the top of the page here, and I've labeled out some of what I'm going to be doing in the next few minutes to kind of help you guys, to give you a sense of where we're headed. I'm going to start out with what I call fur process number 1, and there's 2 different fur methods that I'm going to go over with you. The first fur method I think works better if you're dealing with an animal that has light fur, like maybe a white dog or a tan dog. And so what we would do with that situation, we're going to start out with a lighter area or lighter application of our color. So let's say that your animal is white. And for our demo's purposes, this is going to be really hard for you to see. So I'm going to actually make my animal, instead of being a white animal, I'm going to add in a little bit of yellow as well, or peach. Maybe I'll do peach. I think you'll be able to see the peach. So I'm building up a layered system here. So I'm getting my light colors down first. And again, we're not coloring in like a coloring book, so we would kind of do some blending. Now we want to make this, though, look a little bit more believable like a fur. So how would you do that? Well, the thing that you're going to need to do is to come in and add some of the shadow colors that you would have in your animal. So the first thing I want to caution you about is don't jump to just using black for your shadows. You can certainly use black, but I'd prefer you start with other colors first. Just like when we study painting, we're going to think about adding layers of color to create more depth. If you just go with black, it flattens your composition. So I'm going to come into my light peach and white that I have down, and I'm going to use a bit of brown and some dark blue. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and create small feather marks going into that. So these are on top of the lighter color. And I'm lifting after each application so that it kind of trails back. I could do the same thing with my blue. Then I'm going to come in and work on top of that with more lighter color. You can also use your finger to blend, and that will soften the effect of those lines just a little bit. If you notice that the end of your pastel is like this one and tends to get dirty, which happens really easily with pastel, keep a little towel on the side and clean it off a bit. So then I'm going to pull this back in to create a little feathered look. Okay, so let's do that one more time. A lighter color, then come in with your darker color. Then fade it back, just like that. And that's going to replicate kind of a fur effect. Let's say, though, that your animal's really dark. Maybe you have a black dog, or you have a dark brown dog, or you have some animal that's really, really dark. What I would like you to do is think about what highlight color that you see in that animal. Again, I'm just going to start with peach. I'm going to start with some lighter areas of the animal. Some areas might be solid dark, but I'm going to come in and add some lighter areas first, and you'll see why in just a moment. Then I'm going to go really dark all on top of it. And maybe I'm going to do a really dark blue for my animal, or maybe I'm going to mix the black in with the blue. So that instead of, if I have a black lab, there'll be flickers of color that happen in that animal, even if it's a really dark animal. Then I'm going to blend these down so that it looks really dark. And then what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to come in with what I call a texture addition tool. And a texture addition tool could be something as simple as your fingernail. It could be the end of a paper clip. It could be, my favorite, the end of a ballpoint pen cap. It could even be a mechanical pencil that you have retracted the pencil point. But what we're going to do with this is we're going to come in and scratch out the fur texture. And because I started with that lighter peach color as my base, when I scratch off with my scratch tool, I'm going to be able to see a lighter value under it. And as you can see, that kind of replicates the concept of fur. And I do want to show you that different tools will make different size marks. This paper clip tip makes a much finer mark, a much finer texture than the end of the cap does. If I use my fingernail, that's going to give me a very wide streak. So they will give you different size texture marks. And I'm going to hold that up kind of close so you guys can see that. I hope that that's more visible when I hold it up close. So that's how you would start with your basics of fur. Okay. So what if we're going on though, let's say that you're doing a bird. Maybe you're doing a blue jay or a cardinal, and you want to kind of show the overlap of the feathers. Okay, we do have a couple of you who are doing, I think parakeets. So I know some of you are doing birds. In fact, I think one of the birds might have blue feathers. So what I'm going to do is I'll do blue, I guess. So I'm going to start out with a light base color. Again, my feathers are going to be in the blue range. So I'm going to start with a light blue. I'm going to actually put in a little bit of gray mixed with my blue. Remember that even when you scratch off, there's going to be a slight stain that's left from what you apply down to the page first. So I'm going to put some blues down. Now, a lot of you probably are noticing that when you're putting down your light colors, you might still see a little bit of your pencil. It's a great idea, as I mentioned with the face drawings that we did with the the India ink drawings that we were starting. When we did those, I had asked you guys to erase your grid lines. And it's a good idea that if you erase your grid lines before you start doing a whole lot of your pastel. I know some of you have already kind of gotten into these, but at this point I would pause and erase any grid lines that you still have left. Just leave the line drawings for the animal. So then I'm going to come in and I'm going to do some shaping for my feathers. So let's say that you have some shadow region with your color. I'm going to fade that down. And maybe my feather has some blues, and then maybe there's like a little white band that goes near it. Maybe there's really dark areas under some parts of the feathers, so I'm going to come in and add a little bit of shadow in that area, mixing it with the blue. So mix your colors together so that the blue is a little bit more dominant than the black. Mix those shadows down. And then what I'm going to do to show kind of the feather effect, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a little bit of our texture marks. I'm doing light and then I'm doing some darks over it. And now what I'm going to do is come in with one of my texture tools, excuse me, and I'm going to come in and kind of define some of the texture that we would see inside of these feather structures. So I'm going to come down and maybe there's a lighter band that happens right through here. Maybe I'm going to take off a lot of that. The oil pastel, because it is layered, really lends itself to this kind of multi-tool approach. And again, you would look at your animal, you would look at your feathers, and you would decide, hey, is this feasible for me? Or nope, that's not what I need, Miss T. And then you just kind of make your decision. But you can see by doing that you create more of a value effect, you create more textures. I want to also talk to you guys for just a second about grass. A lot of you guys are going to be doing backgrounds and you're going to have animals that are outside. And one of the things that I see very frequently with beginning drawing students is that they will kind of mess up what I call the spatial component of backgrounds, and I want to talk to you about that before we go. I'm going to clean off some of the darker color on my fingers before I do blending. I'm going to start out with my grass. I'm going to think of it just like I would for any of my animals. The recurring theme in everything that we've done so far is to start with a lighter variation of your color. So if you're doing dried grasses, maybe you start with like a peach or something that's a lighter range. I'm going to do maybe more like spring grass. So I'm going to start out with, again, my lighter variation. And maybe I mix a little yellow in this so it's even more of a yellowish kind of green. If you're mixing your colors and a little bit of another color, like a red or something from where you were using it on another area gets off onto your drawing, don't panic, okay? Having colors that you've used in other parts of your composition is called color repetition. And that's a really, really good, wonderful, powerful, important thing to do. You always want to have the colors that you're using repeat throughout your drawing or throughout your painting, which we're going to be chatting about sometime next week, hopefully. So I'm starting out with some lighter color. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to add darker color on top of this. So I'm going to come in and apply some greens. Now in some of these areas I might just want to use, hey, the end of my pastel itself to do my mixing, like this. And maybe I'm going to feather that up and fade it and blend it. Notice that in all of these areas I'm not leaving a ton of the white paper showing through. Okay, these are about layers of color, not gaps of paper. Okay, we don't want to see dandruff marks in your drawing. I don't want to see a ton of paper. I want to see color. So if I see a gap, I'd much rather see a color under there than I would see white page. So the way that I'm applying this, I'm staggering it and trying to indicate kind of a grass concept to begin with, just by the way that I'm applying the pastel. When you're thinking about things like grass and spatial drawings, things that are closer to us are going to appear larger. Things that go back in space are going to get smaller. So I'm going to come in now with a dark blue and create yet one more layer for my shadows. And then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with this. I'm working in layers. And now I'm going to take one of my scratching tools. I could again use the end of my fingernail. I could use a mechanical pencil. And I'm going to make some little blades of grass. So now I'm going to scratch off the ones that are up close and make them larger. And I don't want them all to go the same way, okay? We don't want it so regular and pattern oriented. Okay, nature tends to, things like grass, they flow in different directions. So the strands of grass that are close to me, I'm going to have them larger. So you're going to have more detail work in things that are closer to us. Notice how if I scratch all over that layer of green and dark blue, I will have the lighter color that I put down first show. Then I can come in with one of my other colors and I can do cleanup with my edges. If you're noticing that you need a sharper point on your pastel and you've blended it a lot, you can take just the very end of the wrapper that's around your pastel. Don't unwrap the entire pastel, but if you peel off just the little end, it will give you a really nice sharp edge that is really good for doing things where you need a line, a fine line. And you could do things like a thin blade of grass like that. You'll notice that when we do fur, you could do like things like whiskers. I'm gonna come in and do this a little bit with my left hand so you guys can see a little better the shadows cast on the other side. Do a little bit over here. So these are taller blades, and then in the background, we're gonna do shorter ones, because what's gonna happen spatially as things get further back from me, they get shorter. It's a smart idea to also think even about having a value transition as you go back. Value transition, again, meaning things could have lighter values up close, and then as it gets further back, maybe your base color is just only the mid-range green instead of the really light yellow. So longer strands versus shorter strands of grass. And again, you're not going to do every blade of grass once things get kind of a certain distance behind you, but you want to imply the texture. Okay, and then hopefully you're able to see that these are much longer and these are shorter. And that's starting to make sense to you. And then of course you would come in after you have it kind of established, maybe you come in and do a cross direction piece here or there, just to even give it a better sense of depth. What I would avoid doing is kind of coming in on a white surface and doing this. Okay, that's not gonna look like grass, okay? So we've gone over some things. Let's kind of review what we've done so far. We've done, obviously, fur. We've done 2 variations. We started light and added darks. Then we did another variation where we started light and went full dark and then scratched out some highlight areas. From there, we talked about feathers, and we said, again, you start with a light base and then come in and do your shadows around it and then do your texture marks. And then we talked about thinking about depth when we were doing things like grass, so letting things that are closer to you be larger, things that go back further spatially should get smaller. And then the other thing I want to real quick point out to you guys would be like fish scales. And this is one that I almost always forget for whatever reason, but I think we do have at least one fish this time. So we will chat a little bit about fish scales. So the easiest way to do fish scales, and you would of course want to look at your image that you're working with, but it would be to use a similar kind of process to what we've been discussing, where you would start with some lighter variation. If you're doing like a goldfish, start with a lighter variation of your color. In this case, I'm going to use peach, and then I'm going to come in and mix some orange with it. And if the fish changes colors, let's say that this fish goes from having an area that is maybe an orange to maybe a gold or a white that's next to it, what you should do is kind of draw that in as you go. Remember, we're not just doing a solid coloring, we're doing mixing the colors together as you go. So we're thinking of blending those colors. And then maybe the shadow areas on this fish, or maybe a goldish, maybe they're brownish. I'll do a brownish. Clean off the end of the pastel. So then I'm going to come in over these and do a dark variation. And with this, you can get just as insanely detailed as you choose. If you're doing like reptilian scales, like a lizard or something like that, these could be super, super small details. But I can come in again with my favorite, which is like a little pen cap. And again, these are very, very regular. And maybe the next row is kind of in the center of that. Or maybe you want to go even darker. And maybe the shape of your scales is not as regular. This is why even art teachers need visual references. If I had some scales in front of me, I would be able to really easily know, hey, this is exactly the kind of scale that I want. And you can come in and then scratch away with these and just get super insanely detailed. And this can be really, really fun. Okay, and then as you're building up these layers and these processes, this will hopefully help you kind of get going with your image, with your animal. And I'll give you a little touch up, a little close-up view of these now so you can see them a little better. So again, we have our scales here. Hopefully you can see that. We have our feather process here and our fur, both fur processes, and our grass. And then of course the ultimate goal is lending towards getting your drawing going. And so I've just started working with this drawing, getting the pastel added. And you can see I'm doing a combination with the fur of starting with my lights and pulling in the darks. And then also having some dark that I then pull light, and I've been doing also some scratching in there. And so it's just getting started, but so are you guys. And kind of that's how we're doing this. So happy drawing. Work on those textures, but remember, start light. Don't apply a ton of dark before you get your lights laid out to protect those areas on the page. All right, chat soon. Bye.